We're on Cross Street in Manchester. We're not going to put a bet on. We're here because...
Bet on!
What do you reckon? Yeah, this site here, this was Rafters. Rafters in the late 70s and coming into the early 80s was the biggest pub in the north, you know, in terms of the music that was being played. And what was going on here that made it so special?
From the first night when we had about 200 in, 6 weeks later we had lockouts for 2 years, 600 plus every Saturday night. You know, bringing in a much more mixed culture of music into Manchester, and also bringing, you know, almost the black crowd out of Moss Side into central Manchester. So we created an electricity that you and I talked about that happened at Legend. That was happening here, started to happen in 1978.
But yeah, Rafters, apart from being Rafters, was also in the early 2000s the home of the Electric Chair, which revolutionised things again for Manchester at that point in time. When I first went in Electric Chair and I heard the music, and it was really eclectic, coming from all sorts of different directions, very refreshing at the time when everything was generic, one way.
Rafters in particular just kept this history going with black music, and you know, really, for me, very, very special place from 1978 to about 1983. This building behind us, this door in particular, I think it was the third home in Manchester for an American guy called Ed Balbier, who brought over, he came to live in the UK and he imported you know, American music. I think this was the third home, and eventually he changed the name from Global Records to Yanks, and this was the entrance to Yanks. And once you'd spent all your money in spinning and whatever you got left, you'd come down here to hopefully pick up not only would you get great music, but you'd be able to buy a lot of it because the prices were wholesale prices.
Right.
But you know, Ed was a Bovril kind of character. You know, if you caught him in the right mood, you could get all around the place. But if you didn't, then you just had to shop in the shop. But that was cool. It was just a great place to get music in Manchester.
Brilliant. This is the what became of the Hacienda. It opened in, I think it was May of 1982. It's a strange thing when it opened because they had it so wrong in a lot of ways early doors, and it wasn't connected to what we were about. When I was resident here for a period of time in 1983, we did the Friday night funk night, and it was really hard work because it was cold, it was big, and there was not enough people. They were struggling to get people through the doors at the time. They had a membership scheme. We had some really good one-off nights, Houdini, Nutriment, Broken Glass, amazing here. They became almost like the resident dancers. We had some fantastic one-offs, but the whole time it was a real struggle. And like you said, with the DJ booth, so badly positioned, and the people who opened it were just crazy dreamers. They had this vision, and it didn't work. So when I was here, the idea of trying to put the black crowd in with an alternative crowd, it's not going to happen. But they kept with that vision, they kept with it. And then 5 years down the line, bingo, it's happened.
Phenomenal.
And all of a sudden, this is one of the best known clubs in the world, or was one of the best known clubs in the world. And anywhere I go, people are, Hacienda, what was the Hacienda like? And you know, I have to kind of disappoint and say, well, when I was there, it wasn't very good.
My connection with this place was huge because I was working at Rock City in Nottingham. I turned up for one of the old days, and Paul Mason had been the manager there, who'd become a very good friend of both Jonathan and myself. Jonathan, of course, lived in at Rock City. And he said, I'm moving up to Manchester. Look out, boys. I'm taking over the Hacienda. I didn't DJ here prolifically, but I think what Paul Mason achieved and what the Hacienda achieved was an identity that initially they were trying to squeeze out themselves, which kind of happened naturally later when a combination of people like Mike Pickering, people like Graham Park, people like Paul Mason put together and created something that, again, I'd done the Rafters, you'd done Legend, and now there's something new on the block. It was a vision of Tony Wilson, who had a combination of reintroducing the club culture he wanted to, alongside his love for Manchester and his passion for Manchester. So I mean, eventually the equation worked and we got to the hacienda.
This place was massively important. As far as I'm aware, I wasn't about at this point, but it brought together, would I be correct in saying, the Northern Soul and the jazz funk crowds for the first time?
Eventually it did. I mean, originally it was a Northern Soul all day venue. Everybody who was anybody, came to play at the All Days in Manchester. It's anybody we could get our hands on. And some fantastic all days. When you think that Archibald and the Drells in all the white suits, the whole thing got live on stage, and thousands of people, and that integration between jazz funk and Northern Soul, where there was a definite resistance from Northern Soul to accept it. And as time went on, of course, the All Days, as we went into the 80s, they became very much Northern Soul. Went into the background, jazz funk came to the fore, and of course Ronnie Lawes, people like that were coming in, so it became just as important for the jazz funk scene as it had been for Northern Soul.
Dance floor? And you used to DJ from there?
No, we used to DJ from there. There used to be two sets of stairs in each corner, and we set the DJ console up on the stairs, and then of course live on stage would be the acts. But that stage was lower, almost just slightly above the level of the dance floor. The level of the dance floor was probably chest height, and so you would go up the stairs at the side to get on the dance floor. This electricity, when the Ritz was, even when it first started with Northern Soul, but then even more so the electricity of introducing like jazz funk and soul. So we went from that to your George Bensons, your Ashford and Simpsons, and then we brought Chris Hill up here, and Chris Hill played live up here, and that's the first time a lot of people had seen Chris Hill play the old flute going through a Wem copycat. So then Offley and John Grant went and bought two Wem copycats.
But how does it feel like, this is, we're talking now, we're going back like 40 years to when...
Everybody who came to the Ritz back then, everybody who'd experienced this dance floor, the dance floor was as much about the conversation as the music and the day. I mean, to actually walk upstairs at the side here to get on the dance floor, which as I say, was about chest height, but underneath the floor here was huge suspension, which when you went down you could actually see when you underneath here with the toilets and everything, these huge suspended things that were making this dance floor, and it would move considerably. This particular room was the central point, the meeting point on a Sunday for the All Days, 1,000+ people from all over the country, where people could eventually have a taste of all the different styles that were going on.
And the thing about All Day is, and I mean, I've kind of mentioned this to promoters now, I mean, what was great about them was that they took the kind of biggest DJs out of the region and put them in one club. And what that tended to do is brought all the different crowds together, but then those crowds might check out this DJ in that town or that DJ. So it connected the scene, and it made it possible for people to understand. Because you wouldn't really understand what was going on unless you read Blues and Soul or Black Echoes, listened to maybe something like Mike Shaft on Piccadilly Radio. You're struggling then.
To be able to experience it in this environment, I mean, coaches used to come here the same way they did to Blackpool, and I think some people got on those coaches who'd never experienced it before and then stayed with the scene. It changed their life. It changed their life in the way they treated clubs, the way they treated culture, to understand that there was an underground music scene that was totally specific to what it was about. It wasn't about the charts, it wasn't about anything else. Some of the music, of course, that we played ended up in the charts, but ultimately it was very much an underground scene. And even today, Manchester Ritz is putting on fantastic live acts, and it's still very much an iconic part of the city. This was the second home of the Twisted Wheel, originally in Brasno Street. This came round here into Whitworth. I came here a couple of times in the back of a van, didn't get in because I looked far too young, as I do today. But this place, which started to integrate with Northern Soul, Brian 45 Phillips was one of the original DJs here. And also Les Cackel used to frequent here, another name from the Blackpool Mecca era. Again, iconic club, and as it says up there, the birthplace of Northern Soul, and as we know it, definitely, because Dave Godin had come up here to experience what he was hearing in his record shop. He had a record shop in London called Soul City, and he had a label called Soul City, and what was happening, particularly on the football match days, guys from the north were going down there, and they wanted, the records they were asking him for intrigued him, because London was very much about a slower pace, about James Brown, which we talked about before, about slower records, but all of a sudden these guys from the north wanted these faster records. So Dave eventually was coaxed into coming up and you know, his first visit to the Twisted Wheel, which then cemented the Twisted Wheel in Northern Soul history forever. This was very much the birthplace of the next explosion of Northern Soul. Originally put together, the idea of clubs like this, put together by Roger Eagle, who by the time it had got here, played much less of a part of it. But it was driven on as it changed from blues music and became more of a soul venue. And from that point, and certainly the interest from blues and soul, which, you know, really, I mean, it's ironic that they would come back in the early 80s and then promote a night later on. So it was Godin's exposure of the wheel, and then blues and soul still being involved years later when we came back and did the main event with Mike Shaft. Mike Shaft, of course, who had a very popular soul show on Piccadilly Radio, and he came to me one night and he said, Piccadilly are offering to put the money up to do a gig at the old Twisted Wheel, which was then PLACEMATE 7.
Yeah, there are a few things happening over here. That's Piccadilly Plaza up there, and you have Piccadilly Radio, which is really important because Mike Shaft was doing the soul show there. I did my mixes there, and you know, it was a major place for my legacy. And also, RCA had an office in there. We were talking earlier. Richard Serlin, famous wooden casino DJ, worked there with a guy called Derek Bramwood. And I remember going there in 1976. I think it was the first time I'd been to Spinning. I went with Terry Linane, and we went in there, and I picked up copies of the Double Exposure album with 10% on, Dr. Buzzard's original Savannah Band, and all this. So he was looking after Sal Soul and all the RCA labels. And then a bit further down this way was the original Piccadilly Records.
Here was the old Piccadilly Records, which I originally came up to in the 70s and used to root downstairs for Northern Soul. This was always on 2 floors, the downstairs was always the interesting one. But Piccadilly Records, as you came from the station into the square, this would probably be the first record shop I'd hit on a Saturday before moving on down to Cross Street and Spinning.
So what was your record shop, you know, schedule when you came in?
Well, get off there at Piccadilly, then we go to Piccadilly Records here. I go to Spinning, and back in the early days, down to Victoria Station. That was Ralph's Records. I mean, Piccadilly Records always had a good eclectic mix of records. Originally 7s, and then you find 12s. I think they're over in the Northern Quarter nowadays, still very much at the forefront of edits, obscure 12s. You know, Afro music, you know, so very much an important part of Manchester's vinyl history, and they still very much stick with that way today.
This used to be, not a betting shop, but Spinning, which was a very, very famous record shop nationally. That was based in Manchester. This is where come bought your imports, all the latest tunes were coming here. It was owned by a guy called Gary Lane, and you know, people working behind the counter included Kev Edwards and Harry Taylor, both DJs, you know, in their own right. And yeah, when did you first come?
1970. I pulled up on the other side of the road here, went into a pastisserie for something to eat, and then spotted that Spinning was here, came across the road and bought some records. To the right here was Spinning Records. You used to drop down. If there were 6 people in there, then it was rammed. But on a Saturday, because all the DJs who got onto the import bandwagon would accumulate here on a Saturday, there could be 20, 30 people around the shop waiting to go in, and they'd have the routine from about 9:30 onwards once they'd open the imports, sticking them on the deck. And Gary would have this saying, just throw your wallet on the counter and I'll fill your bag. And he did. He used to literally fill people's bags for DJs, put in at least 3 or 4 records every time that were nothing to do with what the guy had actually asked for. So they'd end up getting home and finding records that they hadn't actually asked to purchase. But on the left-hand side was a club called Smarties.
Yeah, that's right.
And we used to work there, John Grant and I used to work there on a Sunday night. And that was another phenomenal night. I mean, it took on a different kind of lifestyle to Rafters, but this place on a Saturday was iconic. Everybody who was anybody DJ-wise would be here for the latest imports, and they were here every Saturday. Absolutely phenomenal mine of information. You know, we've got the internet today, but back then, chatting to other DJs, you know, listening to the music that was being played from here, particularly on a Saturday from that. But some weeks I'd be up here 3 or 4 times a week, and this would be the central point.
All right, this place here is like a real hidden gem. It's somewhere that in Manchester history isn't really mentioned. You very rarely hear about it, yet in here, this is where house started in Manchester. This is where people like Foot Patrol, the dancers came. This was a club in the 60s that was owned by footballer Georgie Best. It was called Slack Alice.
It was.
And the people that owned Wigan Pier and Legend bought this place around about 83.
Yes.
So when were you here?
Yeah, I came soon after that. I was brought in, originally introduced to it by Mike Shaft, and then came along and talked to Paul, who was connected with the Lennon family and connected with Wigan Pier and with Legend. And me and Mike were asked to come and play, a variety of what we both played, because we kind of gone musically our separate ways, and I started to play, as you say. And for me, without a doubt, this is the home. This is where house music started in Manchester, but very much an important part for me of establishing, or beginning to establish house music way before the Hacienda, way before my connection with Paul Mason. We've done the Rock City thing, but house music was creeping up on its own, and for me personally, I couldn't ignore that, and so this was definitely that balance that Mike and I had here was a great time.
Sky so vast is the sky, with stars that just drift by.
So there's a kind of betting shop theme going on here. Going back to the early 80s, Colin, you'd done Rafters, the main event in Manchester, but then you weren't well for a while, and you kind of lost your footing in the city, and there was the same period where Legend was coming through, everything was changing, everything was in flux, and it was like, you just kind of out of step for a moment.
That's right.
But then you found your way back, and it was this place here, which was then Berlin.
Number one, this wasn't the busiest club I did. And number two, I took a leaf out of your book. It was a Tuesday night.
Yeah.
Originally, free tickets, and then I think we whacked it up to about 50 pence or 20 pence. But what I managed to achieve here that I felt I'd never done anywhere else, and it was, as you say, I was still battling health, and it was a difficult time for me. But what I was able to do here was to take all the aspects of black music that I'd got into, like with the jazz. What was it for me? I was playing 4 5-hour sets here, along with Ewan Clark. Ewan would play, and then when I arrived, I'd pretty much take over for the rest of the night. But the music would start off being, a mixture of Brazilian, down-tempo jazz, lifting it up a little bit, and then we'd crash in with everything, with a little bit of electro, with some house, the controllers, stuff like that from that period, and then float away, ending up playing down-tempo stuff, from Van Dross albums, from all those soul artists that produced albums in the 80s. There was always 1 or 2 laid-back things. In other words, again, a little bit of a reference back to Persian, a little bit of a reference back to the Reno, because I got guys in here, the Rasta guys were down here, we've got jazz dancers, we've got people who used to travel in, and it was also the early days for people like Giles Peterson. So Giles Peterson's best friend, in fact, Andrew, he used to come here every week because he was at university in Manchester. There were so many connections here for me, and the ability to stand there for 4 hours and play such a range of music for me was just, that feeling was just fantastic. And when I look back now at the people who came and then went on and took a piece of what happened here and developed something, like Barry Malini, Dean Johnson from Expansion Records. They all took a piece of this and went out and created their own thing as well, which for me was just fantastic, because the atmosphere in here, the magic, there was no pressure, there was no politics, expression to dance, and it was a basement club again, nice low roof, sound system was okay, but it was sufficient for what we wanted.
Take me with you, don't you know? I'll be running and searching for you.
Want to let you into your own club?
Here, when you were there.
Oh shit, Nigel! Fucking hell! Well, this used to be Legend, which was my piece of the rock between late 81 and the end of 83. It's now called Fifth Avenue. Legend had this incredible sound and lighting. It had something like half a mile of neon, apparently, they reckoned, that was around there. They had a laser system, they had, you know, with the sound system, they had a thing called a sound sweep that sent the sound round the speakers or pulsed it out. You know, they had,
It was the next stage from quadraphonic sound.
It was crazy
it was
stuff.
an incredible setup, a lot of money. Something we'd not seen the like of in Manchester at that time.
well, definitely, and that's what just give it, you know, completely gave it its edge. With the music that was coming through as well, the electronic music out of New York, it was just the right environment, the right place at the right time. And Wednesday night was the night I did, and it was a predominantly black crowd. There was some white girls, a few white guys, but it was mainly, you know, black people who were seriously into dancing, seriously into their music. I mean, for me, it was the end of the line in a way. It's what I'd aspired to. I obviously was in Liverpool, and there was Les Spain at the timepiece. And when I went to the timepiece when I was 16 and saw what was going on there, that was it. And that's what I found here in this environment with that crowd. Amazing. You know, they were just like so much more into it than your normal club people. It was a different level completely.
I mean, we got that intensity at Rafters, we got that intensity at the Ritz, but when you think about those, they were Saturday, Sunday venues. This was a Wednesday night, and this club wasn't open specifically for your night, but your night became the most successful club, the most successful night in this club. And I think that changed the way they thought about things as well, and you know, the emphasis became more on the music, not just the music you're into, just but looking at other aspects of playing new music, opening new ideas, the same way we discussed with Hacienda about looking for a formula. But you created a formula in here, the combination of yourself, your attitude, a different attitude to mine at the time. And the first time I came up here and saw it, I was absolutely blown away. You know, to go away like you've gone away from clubs and thought, yeah, there's something going on here.
This notched it all up a level. It was compact. It was, you know, it was just a very, very special. And people ask me now, what's the greatest night you've done or greatest club you played? And it's this for me. You know, this was the culmination of my dreams as a DJ.
Yeah, you can see, because the building would have been here, so this is the Reno.
Right, we've come out of the city centre now and we're in Moss Side. Neither of us worked at the club that was once here, but it's so vitally important for Manchester and black music in Manchester. It was a club called the Reno, and there was a club above it called the Nile. The Nile played reggae, the Reno played funk and soul.
This is the original site of the Reno Club, which I think was also highly successful, because right along here, you know, lots of West Indian businesses, recording studios, there was record shops there back in the day, and easy access from the estate, so for people to come across and they could come and dance and listen to music all night.
Yeah, all night.
You know, and that was the difference. So we'd finish Rafters and people would leave Rafters and actually come here. It was West Indian driven. I mean, you had the blues parties in Hume, you had the blues parties in Moss Side, and that reggae connection was obviously massive. And quite a lot of you know, the big soul songs were covered as reggae versions, and there was Lovers Rock, there was all these different styles. So you got a situation where soul music, you know, had a kind of wedged the door open and got in there. This is the place that the West Indian community came and like a position of strength and a mixture of playing single records and maybe toasting, maybe not toasting, but there was no urgency to move on to the next record. Records were played individually and very much on a down tempo tip as well. I mean, we talked about a band on AVI, the Pomplamoose. I mean, we would play the sort of 100, 110 BPM track, but Persian would play the slower tracks off albums like that, and that developed its own following and culture in Manchester. The connection between the music with spinning records and Persian looking to create his own sound.
And the DJ you said there was Persian, who's like, I mean, he's got his legend in Manchester, but he was never part of the scene we were part of.
No, he remained very much part of this kind of setup, very much part of the blues party, very much part of that reggae soul culture. But I mean, Persian was very much a soul man and very popular in spinning. I'd have chats with him in spinning, and he would occasionally come down to Rafters early doors when we were playing new music, and we were able to vary the tempo a lot more. Slow them down early doors. To drive past here and not see the building anymore, for me, I mean, coming up in the 70s, it was always here. It wasn't a place I frequented a lot. Came a couple of times, stood at the back. You're quiet. I'm a white guy here in a different world, but definitely had a cultural music effect on Manchester. Very important club.